Today I'm talking about taking up acting in your 40s. I'll share my experiences of how I got into acting at such a late age, and I'll give some insights into how I overcame some of the obstacles that came up for me. So thanks for tuning in. In this episode of One Day I'll Tell the Truth, I'm talking about becoming an actor in your 40s. So most people, particularly those not happy with their current situation, think about career changes at different stages in their lives, but in most cases find it probably too hard to make a change. So I thought I'd start by sharing how I got into acting and what my circumstances were at the time. So back in 2014, as some of you would know from my previous episode, I managed to quit a lot of bad habits. I stopped drinking, smoking, gambling, stopped drinking coffee. And one of the things that helped me get through that challenging, all those challenging early stages was to become more creative. And this took the form of writing initially. I'd done a bit of stuff previously. I'd done a couple of short screenwriting courses here and there, and I found myself writing a blog, and I was also working on a screenplay. So I guess by the end of 2014 into 2015, I'd also started writing a book. I should mention that, which I'm still working on, and it's coming along. It's coming along all right. So during this time, I was also dealing with a lot of pressures from my business. I'd been in a legal dispute with my service station landlord for the previous couple of years, and it was coming to a head. So up until early 2015, I guess I could say I was in a reasonably good place. Not a great place mentally, but working through things. You know, I'd resisted the temptations to drink and gamble. I was about 7-8 months in, and I was being creative. I was writing, and that was going along well. And then out of nowhere, it just hit. I found that I couldn't write another word. I had writer's block. But until you experience it, it's really difficult to understand. I guess it's like one day everything's flowing, and then overnight it's just like a dam's been put up. And yeah, it was quite surprising because I felt like things were moving along really well, but obviously maybe they weren't. So I had a chat with my therapist about it, and she suggested just doing something else creative, anything. So I thought, okay, and she didn't really suggest anything, just thought, well, do something else creative and it'll come back. I thought, okay. So I got online, and initially I started looking for other writing courses. I thought, that would be maybe a good way to kickstart me back into gear if I was forced to write in a class environment. And that was when I stumbled across acting classes. So I started looking at different schools online, and I started to consider the pros and cons of doing classes. And then I started to have little flashbacks to different times in my life when friends or a former partner had suggested that I take up acting, and I'd completely forgotten about these instances. So I found myself falling down the online acting school rabbit hole. It was there's quite a few out there, and what I did was I emailed a whole bunch of schools, at least half a dozen. And also made a couple of calls, waited for return calls, and basically just said, look, I'm a novice, absolutely no acting experience. I'm in my 40s. Is this even a thing for someone in my position? And, just asked what was involved, what kind of programs they had, and just played it by ear. Basically, I just thought I'd go with the flow. And a couple of schools got back really quickly, and some of the others I didn't hear back from them for a week or two or a number of days. And by that time, I'd pretty much already made a decision, which, with the value of hindsight, I probably would have, sat down with a few of the other schools just to see what their take was. But as I said, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, I found myself in Sydney having an interview with a teacher from a particular school. The teacher was also a senior student and also worked in this capacity interviewing new students, basically selling the classes. And when I look back now, funnily enough, I would find myself performing that same role, conducting interviews, 3 years down the track. So, look, I'll chat about that a little bit later. But I ended up enrolling. I guess the vibe suited me, and they had a schedule that worked for me also, so that was good. I was still running the service station at this point, still embroiled in legal dramas with my landlord, and again, I'll be doing probably a couple of episodes at least just on my experiences in business and what I went through, particularly with that situation. So yeah, getting back, I started a couple of weeks later at the beginning of a new block or term of classes, and I was doing 3 classes a week, 2 technique classes and 1 screen acting classes. So I kind of got into it, really. There was also an expectation to rehearse at least a couple of times a week. And to be honest, I struggled with that, struggled to juggle everything as well as, the legal stuff that was happening and with, the content of the classes and just getting my head around this new environment. It was a completely new experience. It was not what I had expected. And I guess I hadn't really put enough thought into what to expect. But I guess it's pretty common knowledge that one of the greatest fears that most people have is to speak in front of other people, to do public speaking. And not that acting is public speaking, but it's basically performing and speaking, because that's part of the performance, in front of a group of strangers, and lots of it. So whether you're filming a scene for a show or for a commercial or whatever it might be, it's in front of a group of people who, most of which you probably won't know. Over time, you'll get to know people, obviously. But and then of course, if you're acting in a theatre space, well then obviously there's an audience. Well, you hope so anyway. So for me, a big hurdle was getting through that initial period of self-consciousness where you're constantly aware of people watching you, and it can be a scary place. At first it is anyway, and definitely was for me. And I think for most adults in their middle age, taking up acting for the first time, it can be pretty daunting. And unless you're in a group surrounded by people that you feel comfortable with, you're probably going to struggle. And that's why I suggest if you are going to take up acting, that you're certain that you feel good about where you're going, and then that's common sense, obviously. And people do this subconsciously, but I think there can be instances where people get swept up in the idea of becoming an actor, and they might be in a similar situation to myself where they've been told by their peers that they should become an actor and that they're really funny and all the rest of it. And like I said, amongst a group that you're comfortable with, yeah, that's great. But once you start to get in front of strangers, it's a whole different ball game. Another thing that comes up is that, some new students might feel that they need to go to a particular school because that's where such and such went, or they've heard it's a good school. And they might find that once they're in there, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And that could just be simply because the class environment, the people that they've been placed with. So yeah, it was really difficult for me. I found that at various stages I would get rather anxious. I also noticed this amongst some of the other students, even some of the younger students. There's nervousness, but then it can start to bleed into anxiety. And I was the oldest in my class. There were a couple of other classes where there were a couple of other older students, and that fluctuated over the 3.5, 4 years that I trained. But I think we had some shared experiences. So there was students in like their teens, early 20s, then into the biggest group were probably in their early 20s to their early 30s. And then there were a couple, in their mid-late 30s, and then obviously into their 40s like myself, which was a much smaller group. And that was fine, but I did find that for some of us it was quite a shared experience. Having to get in front of class when it was your turn to get up and do an exercise, and it was mostly they were mostly improvisation exercises initially, and it was daunting at times. Other times it was exciting, and you'd get excited and you'd had a good day and you'd been pumped about getting to class, and other times it was the complete opposite. There were times when sometimes I'd drive to Sydney because I'm about an hour and a bit from where the classes were, and other times I would drive halfway and get the train, and there were times where I would get off the train in Sydney and I would jump on the next train back home because I was just too anxious, too nervous, and it just wasn't happening for me that particular day. And that happened 2 or 3 times in the first 6 to 9 months. And there were other times when I'd be in class and I would wait to go last because I was just terrified. And, I thought I would have, an anxiety attack or something in the middle of the class, but it didn't happen. But it was tough. Doing scene work was tough as well. Learning lines I found to be very difficult early on. I would get headaches, and I thought maybe I was eating something wrong or I wasn't getting enough sleep or rest or something like that. But it was actually my bit of brain strain going on, trying to learn lines. And there were times when I just thought I wouldn't get them, and I actually became concerned, thinking that I might have have early onset dementia or something. Yeah, I just hadn't exercised that muscle, and I needed to get it back in shape. 5 years down the track, I can safely say that my retention rate is definitely much higher than it was when I first started acting. So that obviously came into it as well, as far as anxiety goes, going into class and dreading whether I would remember my lines when that class called for that. But I guess it wasn't all being nervous and anxious. There were instances where I could see what this was all about. That really excited me. I'd had moments in some classes where I'd had a good exercise, and I thought, okay, there's definitely something to this whole idea of inhabiting a character and being able to live in that situation for a period of time, but from a really deep and truthful place. It was just such a great experience, and to be honest, it was like a drug, and I was hooked. I was in. And one of the teachers used to talk about it being like a drug, and once you get a taste for it, you'll be hooked. And I used to think, oh, okay. And I got a taste and I got hooked. Initially I hadn't had any real intentions of doing acting seriously. The first 6 to 9 months I thought, well, this is all right. And the other thing was and this is the most important thing, I guess, I started writing again. Yeah, it was great. Something had, I guess, my mental process had shifted, something had shifted inside of me, and I'd had these other confronting circumstances come up, and it released something that allowed me to get back to writing. And I started working on, I didn't go back to my book, I actually started writing a play. So it's important to realize that if you haven't done this sort of thing before, it's going to be confronting, and it's not necessarily going to be for everyone, because most of us don't want to be out of our comfort zones. Some people thrive on that, but others don't. I guess a good indicator is if you're the type of person that is very playful and has that childlike streak in them, you'll be better off, because that's what acting kind of is. It's playing. It's living in this imaginary world, and anyone who's had kids or anyone who's watched kids knows how they can create a situation. They can stand on a couch and imagine that they're standing on a cliff or over a pit of fire and be scared not to fall off the cliff or fall into the pit of fire. And they'll imagine it, and they'll have that sense of realism in that moment. And anyone who watches a child play like that knows what I'm talking about. You see the realism, and that's what actors have to get to. They have to get to that place where we were as children before all this other stuff was stacked on top of us, and we had to be serious all of a sudden. And I guess the same does go for younger adults. There are those that are more playful, more outgoing, and have that natural kind of flair to them. Quite often that's interpreted as talent, but there are those younger adults that are a bit more introverted and take a bit of time to come out of the shell, if you want to call it that. But when they do, it's the same situation as it is for older adults. You just got to find that playful space. So yeah, getting back to why I got into it was to get my creative streak back, and that happened. I got it back. I started writing again. So as I mentioned, I got my writing mojo back about 6 to 9 months in, and another thing that really helped this was the fact that I had to do a lot more reading, whether it be scenes or scripts. Basically, all actors are readers. If you're not a reader, you're going to struggle. So I'd suggest start reading, even if you start reading books. That's important. Reading plays, reading screenplays, it's going to help you out of sight. And I learnt the hard way. But by the end of my first year, going into my second and third years, I was reading dozens of plays a year, numerous screenplays, read more books and plays and screenplays in the 2 to 3 years between 2014, 15 to 16, 17 than I had in the rest of my life combined. The other thing I started to do was to go to the theatre, and pretty much fell in love with that. So up until 2015, maybe been to the theatre 2-3 times. And by the end of 2017, going to 2018, I'd probably been to the theatre 50, 60, 70 times. I don't know. At one stage, I was going 2-3 times a month, every fortnight. I try to go as often as possible these days. Unfortunately, with COVID, that's been difficult. But I managed to go just recently, and that was absolutely magnificent. I don't think you can still get any more tickets for the Picture of Dorian Gray at the Sydney Theatre Company, but that was a magnificent experience. Yeah, anyone who hasn't had a theatre experience, really, I feel they're missing out. I was fortunate enough to be in a performance 3 years ago now, and a bunch of friends that had never been to theatre before came up and watched, and I could tell that they had been really taken aback by that whole experience. And I think some of them have gone to the theatre again since. Others haven't, but at least they've had a taste of it, and then that's fantastic. So towards the end of 2015, as I mentioned earlier as well, my legal situation with my landlord was coming to a head, and it didn't play out well for me. And again, that'll be the subject of another episode. But what it did too is free me up. I ended up with a lot more spare time on my hands, but it also coincided with my father needed some more care, and so I took it as an opportunity to do more classes, be a little bit closer to home, although I was travelling to Sydney regularly. But it just kind of all lined up for me, and I was writing quite a bit, and I just began to grow. Yeah, that kept going for another couple of years after that. And it was a tough time. End of 2015. I probably shouldn't brush over it so easily. And acting and writing really did help me to get through that. I often dismiss it quite easily because it's been a few years now. But at the time, I was struggling. I'd be in legal conferences with lawyers and barristers, and just hemorrhaging money left, right, and center. And there'd be moments when it finally came to a head when I was in court, and I was just thinking, what the hell am I doing here? All I could think about was acting, which was a good thing, really, because I wasn't thinking about having a drink or having a coffee or having a smoke or anything like that. I was pissed off because this circumstance was now taking me away from acting. There was a moment that I'll never forget. I was in the courtroom, and I remember looking up at the judge, and she had it in for me from the outset, and I just thought, what am I doing here? It's ridiculous. What am I doing in this world? And by world, I mean that circumstance, messed up with these dodgy guys and spending thousands and thousands of dollars to try and prove something where I've basically been tricked. But yeah, again, that's a long story. The point is, I was going through a process of change, and it was starting to look brighter, even though it was pretty dark in a few of those moments. So when you're taking up acting at an older age, there are a few more things to consider than just dropping everything and doing the classes. I guess you have to realize that there's quite a bit of work involved. There's that whole reading aspect that I mentioned, but also there are advantages. Clearly, the older you are, the more life experience you've had, and that's definitely a bonus. You have more life experience to tap into, to bring to your characters. And I'm just going to touch on characters for just for a little bit. When I first started the school, I distinctly remember my first conversation with the head teacher of the school, and he asked me if I'd done any acting before, because most adult students that go to an acting school have probably done some acting in the past, whether as a child, as a teenager, maybe some independent local theatre, stuff like that, maybe done some extra work. And he asked me this question, had I done any acting before? And my instinctive reaction was to say, I've been acting my whole life. And he looked at me and he just nodded his head and he goes, oh yeah, okay. And in that moment, I didn't really understand my answer, but it came to me later, and it felt like I was being 100% honest with this guy right in that moment. I was telling him that my life had been bullshit up until now. I've just been playing all these characters, and it was crap. And I realized a bit down the track that acting isn't actually bullshit. It's not pretending. You might often hear people referring to actors in a derogatory manner, as if they're pretending or lying. But the reality is, real acting, good acting, is coming from a very, very truthful place. In my view, it's pure truth. To put yourself into the position of someone else, to experience what they're experiencing, and to live in that essence. Yeah, that's where the good stuff is. And what it does is it just helps you to become a better person. So yeah, went a bit off there, but yeah, I hope you can understand that. It's there's a pure truth in acting that I feel some people miss from time to time, but I think we recognize it when we see it. We know when we've seen an actor do something in a performance that has just blown our minds, who has given us a snapshot into a world that we're sucked in, and there's no thought of even thinking for a moment that this is made up, or this isn't real, or this isn't coming from a place of truth. So yeah, having all this life experience, having played all these fake characters that I consider myself to have played, have helped and continue to help me. And I guess becoming more childlike has helped me. Having that freedom to use your imagination is also extremely, extremely helpful. I'll touch on a few things as far as processes and what to do if you're looking to take up acting. The first is do your homework. There are loads of resources out there. There are plenty of social media groups on Facebook. If you go online, you'll find a bunch of resources, and a lot of those groups are more than helpful. If you just ask, anyone recommend any schools, you'll get a number of active teachers from different schools that are on those forums, and they'll point you in a certain direction, and it's up to you to go out there and interact and have that experience with them and find what feels good for you. And yes, sit with the people. Don't just talk to them on the phone. I guess you really got to get in front of people and get a vibe for who they are and, what they're teaching and how they present themselves. And if it feels comfortable, if it feels good for you, then get in there. Some schools allow you to sit in a class for a class or two. And that's good too. So that'll give you a bit of an indication of what to expect and what's expected of you coming into a class. Although, sometimes I feel that that's not going to give you the experience that you maybe need to know if it's for you or not. You really need to perhaps be put out of your comfort zone. And yeah, you might not get the experience that you need just by watching a class is what I'm saying. But, everyone's different in that respect. So yeah, definitely do your homework, shop around. Don't feel like you have to make a decision there and then. Some schools can be a little bit pushy. Some actors believe that, they need to train at a certain school because a certain actor will train there or a certain teacher teaches there. And look, and that's fine. But, fine actors have come from all manner of situations. And I guess the important thing is to train with as many people as possible, learn as many different techniques because it's a never-ending learning process. And, there's always more growing to be had. And I think the main thing is to feel like you're being challenged and that you're growing, because it's confronting, but at the same time, it's really, really rewarding and satisfying. And, that sounds kind of twisted, but that's what it is. And that's where the satisfaction lies. I guess the other thing is to ask yourself why you're choosing to go into acting. And for most adult beginners, it's pretty straightforward. They want a career change. They need to do something creative in their life. They might just be doing it for a bit of fun, and that's a pretty good starting place. If it's just trying something different, then make sure you're having fun doing it. For a lot of people, it's something that's been on their mind for a long time. I mentioned earlier that I ended up in the role of interviewing new students at the school that I went to, and I met students from all walks of life. It was quite an unbelievable experience, really. I really enjoyed it for the period that I did it, which was about 12 months. I met doctors, I met lawyers, I met stockbrokers, I met an optometrist. I met school leavers, I met teens still at school, tradesmen, concrete truck driver who's still studying and doing quite well. Just people from all walks of life with a passion for acting in most cases. Some were tiptoeing into it, not really sure, but there was something inside them that was driving them to change. The professionals, some were in a situation where they just finished uni. They just finished uni, maybe done their first year of work, had a number of lawyers in that situation, and they just didn't like what they were doing. In a lot of cases, they'd gotten into careers to satisfy some notion, or perhaps under pressure from family or from just from society in general. Maybe they were just academically they were smart and pushed into that area. And I got a deep sense of that. I met so many people that just felt like it felt like this was the first time they were making a decision for themselves and not based on what someone else expected of them. And it was really great to help people to get on that path. I'll go over the main things I'd suggest for people that are looking to get into it based on what I've experienced. And I guess the first one is to find your tribe. Find a group of people that you resonate with, teachers that you're comfortable with, a space that that feels good, that, has a good energetic vibe to it, you're going to get nervous, you're going to be confronted, and you don't want to be around people that just compound that. You want to surround yourself with people that are kind and nurturing. And the other thing is to have realistic expectations. If you're in your 40s as I was, I guess I was fortunate because I've taken the view that, well, I've treated it like a trade, basically, like any other trade, whether you were an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter. I was an electrician, so I did 4 years of training there. And after 4 years, I can tell you I wasn't very good. You wouldn't want me wiring your house, that's for sure. But I've applied this similar sort of principle to it, that, it takes about 4 or 5 years to get to a certain level. And then you're always growing, you always need to be learning. And in order to achieve a certain level of mastery, you just got to keep working at it. Obviously, it's different for everyone. But for me, I feel like a good 5 to 10 years of grind and constantly testing yourself and working on your craft, and things will pan out eventually. Get used to that rejection. There's going to be loads of it. I'd also research, I didn't mention this earlier, but researching actors that maybe became popular or famous at an older age. There are a few that get thrown around quite often, but when you really dig deep into their background, most of them have been doing acting or being creative in some way, shape or form for many, many, many years. For a long time, Morgan Freeman was always put up there as being someone who was only discovered in their 40s. But the reality is he did children's television for years. And what better place to learn how to be an actor? Playing with kids. You can hear it in his voice. It's like he's the old grandfather talking to children, even when he does voiceover stuff. It's fantastic. So there are some examples out there, but the truth of it is most of them have been at it for a long time, and some don't ever get to be famous in the way that we see fame as being, very wealthy and an A-lister, but they become famous in another sense where they master their craft, and they're probably surrounded by beautiful people that appreciate the work they do. They could be working in local theatre or doing short films or doing a whole range of other things. Fame isn't the be-all and end-all, but, in the world that we live, we all need some money. So, yeah, it definitely comes in handy. Yeah, so be prepared for the setbacks. Rejection's part of the game. Do other creative things. If you're going to act, maybe write a bit as well. For many, it kind of comes naturally. Play a musical instrument, and as I said, in most instances, a lot of people are already doing that. Shop around. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. Check out other schools, all the rest of it. Get that right vibe happening. Yeah, I think I'm kind of running a bit dry, aren't I? I'll finish it up about there. Thanks for listening in, and I think I've just about covered everything that I wanted to cover today. I feel that it's important to share this type of experience because a lot of people have thoughts of career changes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be acting. It can be anything else. But if you do, in today's day and age, we have the resources to research and just make sure you're happy and having fun doing it. I wouldn't change a thing. So yeah, I've babbled on for long enough. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to all of you who have listened to my other podcasts. If this is your first time listening in, thank you so much. If you subscribe to YouTube or to any of the other platforms, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. You can see all my YouTube videos and you can listen to all the podcasts on my website now. I did a whole heap of tech stuff in the last few days, and yeah, I can safely say that it's all working really well. TonyBurria.com, nice and easy to remember, and yeah, just thanks for all the support that you've given so far, and I look forward to producing more content for you. If you have any Any comments, any ideas, anything you'd like to hear about specifically, anything you'd like to hear more of, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I look forward to catching you again soon. Take care. This episode of One Day I'll Tell the Truth was produced by Tony Berea. Sound design by Robert Ferreira. An edited video version of this podcast will be uploaded to YouTube in the coming days. You can find details of all my podcast episodes, including full transcripts, edited video copies, and more about me at tonyberea.com.